Hello,
and
welcome
to
our
Guide
to
Evolution.
by
Ben.
and
Ben.
yeah. First, we're gonna start off by defining evolution in the words of Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin said that evolution is descent with modification.
Darwin came up with this idea by studying finches on the Galapagos Islands. He made 4 key observations and 2 inferences.
So the 4 observations that Charles Darwin made were one, that the members of a population vary in their individual traits. Number 2 is that traits are inherited from parents to offspring. Number 3 is that species are capable of creating more offspring than their environment can hold. And the last one is that many of the offspring do not survive, and this is because of environmental restrictions like lack of food.
The inferences were that individuals that are better suited to their environment tend to produce more surviving offspring, and the unequal ability of individuals to survive and reproduce will lead to the accumulation of favorable traits within a population over generations.
Humans have taken this concept and applied it to fit their own needs, and so this is called artificial selection, when humans select for a trait that they want that won't necessarily be selected in nature. And so the example here is the wild mustard plant, and you can see that humans have bred it in specific ways to create 5 different types of plants with different traits, and that's all through artificial selection.
So, it's called a scientific theory, but that doesn't mean that it's uncertain. A scientific theory means that it's an idea that has been supported by a wide body of evidence, which, in the case of evolution, is direct observations, which includes the coloration in guppies and drug-resistant HIV, which have been experiments, the fossil record, homology, and biogeography. So a Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is a way to determine if a population is evolving. The equation is p squared plus 2pq plus q squared equals 1, where p is the frequency of allele A and q is the frequency of allele small a. So in order for a population to be in a Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, which means it's not evolving, it must meet 5 criteria. No mutations, random mating, no natural selection, an infinitely large population size, and no gene flow.
The 5 criteria for Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium are never met all at the same time, so that means that a population is always evolving.
So how can allele frequency change? There are 3 key mechanisms: natural selection, drift, and gene flow.
So genetic drift can happen in 2 different ways. The first way is called the founder effect, and that is when a small group of the population colonizes or moves away and colonizes somewhere else, and basically that changes the allele frequency within the population because they're starting a whole new one with a few individuals. And the second one is called the bottleneck effect, and that's just basically if there's a large catastrophe that causes most of the population to die, then the allele frequency will change based on the few individuals who are left. So there are 3 different types of selection. The first is directional selection, and so that's basically when a population is selected for an extreme in a phenotype. So if you have your normal population right here, the population will end up something like this over here. So you can see that the average phenotype has moved over to one extreme. It can move either way. It doesn't always have to move that way. The second type of selection is called disruptive selection, and that is when a population is selected for both extremes. So if you have your normal population here again, basically your new population after the disruptive selection would look something like this. So you can see that it favors both of the extremes now rather than in the middle over here. And so that's what disruptive is. And so the last type of selection is called stabilizing selection, and that is basically what it sounds like. It stabilizes in the middle. So if you had your population there, it would end up being something like this. So you can see that it no longer favors these outside regions. It only goes towards the middle, and so there's more in the middle. So if natural selection is occurring all the time, why can't we create a perfect organism that can hunt really well, but also fend off predators and camouflage really well and run and fly and swim and do all that?
There are a few key reasons for this. One is that the environment keeps changing, and so that means that organisms that once would have survived are no longer suited to their environment, so frequencies of populations change. There must be compromises. A bird must have light bones to fly, but that means its legs will not be strong enough to run. The source of new traits is mutation, which are only rarely beneficial.
So how exactly does a new species form? So it's through a process called speciation, and there's two types. There's allopatric and sympatric. And allopatric is when a species forms, a new species forms when there's lack of gene flow between two populations. And so this is most commonly caused by geographic isolation. And so if you think about, a species that lives on the circles, I guess, that live on two different sides of a canyon, there's no gene flow, and so they eventually will become two different species after a while. And then the other type is called sympatric, and that is when a population, their speciation occurs when all the individuals are in the same place. And so this can happen through polyploidy or habitat differentiation or sexual selection. And an example of habitat differentiation is like if a frog starts to live up in trees while another part of the population lives down in swamps. Eventually they can't mate because they're never near each other enough to mate, so it eventually will create two different species.
Despite trends, evolution is not goal-oriented. You might see a trend in history where a species is trending towards, say, a larger body size, but that does not mean that evolution is doing that on purpose. It just so happens that the individuals that happen to be bigger are more likely to survive, and thus the trend will continue. The big idea of speciation is that small changes in individual species and populations lead to an overall much larger change, which is called macroevolution, which is evolution on a world scale.
So now we're going to go over just a brief history of the origin of life. So life was thought to be formed first in something called a primordial soup, which basically is like this big solution of amino acids and other organic compounds. And so it has all the components to create a living organism, just they're all separated. And then there's two different theories on how all of those molecules could have come together to create an organism. And the first one is lightning, and basically scientists think that it's possible that lightning could have struck, the primordial soup and given enough energy to create, some reactions and then create life. And the other one is deep sea vents, which basically they also think that deep sea vents provided enough thermal energy to create life.
There are a few key steps in the history of life. The origination of the first single-celled organism, the first eukaryote, the first multicellular eukaryote, and the colonization of land. There were also the mass extinctions. There were 5 in the history of Earth, and the importance of these is that they resulted in adaptive radiation, which is an explosion of speciation. This was made possible because after each extinction, a large number of species were made extinct, which left tons of environmental niches open for new species to adapt into.
So now we're going to get into phylogeny, which is the evolutionary history of a species. And so we look at phylogeny through things called phylogenetic trees. And so I'm going to draw one right here. So you have so basically what a phylogenetic tree does is it shows you the relationships between a bunch of different species. So you're going to have all these different species here, and there's blah, 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 and blah. They have different names, but I'm not going to put them in. So there's different, there's names for everything in the tree. So right here and right here, all these places are called branching points, and that's where a speciation event occurred, or two different species were formed. And also, the group right here is called the outgroup because it is sort of the lonely group that's not related, or it is related to these other groups, but it's the farthest removed from them.
There are 2 ways to order phylogenetic trees, through maximum parsimony or maximum likelihood. Maximum parsimony uses the simplest tree that's consistent with the facts, which means the fewest changes, whereas maximum likelihood is based around the rules that define how DNA actually acts. That's it. Thanks for watching a video on evolution.
Bye!